los alimentos bíblicos. Simbolismo o diseño para la salud diaria. You've probably heard of biblical foods before. Olive oil. Because when you look closely at the foods mentioned in the Bible, something stands out. They're not random. They're consistent, repeated across generations, across regions, across different contexts. And most importantly, they're functional. These weren't just foods people ate. They were foods people relied on. For energy, for healing, for longevity. Long before modern nutrition. Long before supplements. Long before we understood vitamins or antioxidants. These foods were already part of a daily system. A system that supported the body naturally. And today, many of them are considered superfoods. Olive oil for heart health. Honey for immunity. Figs for digestion. But in ancient times, this wasn't health advice. It was survival. So in this video, we're breaking down 10 biblical foods that support your health every day. Not just what they are, but what they actually do inside the body. Because once you understand how these foods work, you're not just looking at history anymore. You're looking at a blueprint, one that people followed for thousands of years, without ever calling it a diet. If there's one biblical food that appears more than any other, it's olive oil. And that's not a coincidence. Because in the ancient world, olive oil wasn't just food. It was daily fuel, daily medicine, and one of the most important natural health foods in the Bible. It was used for cooking, for preserving food, for skin, for wounds, even for light burned in lamps. One ingredient, multiple essential functions. And today, we understand why. Olive oil is rich in healthy fats, especially monounsaturated fats that support heart health. It helps reduce inflammation, supports circulation, and plays a key role in what we now call the Mediterranean diet, one of the most studied diets for longevity. But in biblical times, this wasn't science, it was observation. People who consumed olive oil regularly were healthier, stronger, more resilient, so it became a staple. Not optional, essential. And there's something else. Olive oil was also used for anointing, which today sounds purely symbolic. But when applied to the skin, olive oil hydrates, protects, and even has mild antimicrobial properties. So even that use had a physical benefit, which means olive oil wasn't just a religious element. It was part of a complete ancient nutrition system, a system where food, health, and daily life were fully integrated. And if you're looking for one biblical superfood to include in your daily routine, this is it. Because thousands of years later, it's still doing exactly what it was always meant to do. If olive oil was the foundation, honey was the energy. One of the most referenced biblical foods, honey appears again and again as a symbol of abundance. But more importantly, it was a natural source of energy and healing. In a world without sugar processing, without artificial sweeteners, without energy drinks, honey was the original fuel. Fast absorbing, easy to store, naturally preserved, and immediately effective. Which is why phrases like land of milk and honey weren't just poetic. They described a place of real nutritional abundance. Because honey provides quick glucose for the body. It boosts energy almost instantly, supports brain function, and helps maintain stamina throughout the day. But that's just the beginning. Honey also has powerful antibacterial and antimicrobial properties. It was used to treat wounds, soothe sore throats, protect against infection. Even today, raw honey is studied for its ability to support the immune system, which makes it one of the most underrated biblical superfoods for immunity. And here's what's interesting. Unlike modern sugar, honey comes with enzymes, trace minerals, and natural compounds that support digestion. It's not empty calories, it's functional nutrition. So when ancient people used honey daily, they weren't just adding sweetness, they were strengthening the body, naturally, consistently, without needing anything artificial. Which explains why honey appears so frequently in biblical texts, not just as a symbol of blessing, but as a real, practical source of strength. And if you're looking for a simple upgrade to your daily diet, replacing processed sugar with raw honey might be one of the easiest and most effective changes you can make. Because this isn't new knowledge, it's ancient, and it still works. Figs are one of the oldest foods mentioned in the Bible, and they weren't just eaten occasionally, they were a daily staple. Easy to grow, easy to store, and incredibly effective for digestion. In fact, figs might be one of the earliest known natural remedies for gut health. Because figs are rich in fiber, and fiber does something essential. It keeps your digestive system moving, supports regularity, feeds beneficial gut bacteria, and helps prevent inflammation in the digestive tract. But in ancient times, people didn't talk about gut microbiome or fiber intake. They just observed results. People who ate figs regularly had better digestion, less discomfort, more consistent energy. So figs became part of the system, not just as food, but as function. And there's more. Figs also contain natural sugars for energy, along with minerals like potassium and calcium, which means they didn't just support digestion, they supported the entire body, especially in environments where food variety was limited. Another key detail? Figs were often dried. That made them portable, long-lasting, reliable during travel or scarcity, which turns them into one of the earliest forms of nutrient-dense survival food. So when you see figs mentioned in biblical texts, you're not just seeing a fruit, you're seeing a complete solution. Energy, digestion, storage, convenience, all in one. And today, most people overlook them, even though modern research confirms exactly what ancient people already knew. Figs support gut health, improve digestion, and provide steady energy without spikes, which makes them one of the most practical biblical superfoods you can still use daily. Simple, natural, effective. Few foods in the Bible are mentioned as often as bread. It wasn't optional, it was essential. In fact, bread was the foundation of daily survival, which is why it's often referred to as the core of biblical nutrition. But here's what most people miss. Biblical bread wasn't the same as modern bread. It wasn't ultra-processed, it wasn't stripped of nutrients, and it definitely wasn't designed for long shelf life at the cost of quality. It was simple, whole grains, stone ground, minimal ingredients, which means it was naturally rich in fiber, minerals, and slow-digesting carbohydrates. And that matters, because unlike refined bread today, ancient bread provided sustained energy. It didn't spike blood sugar rapidly. It released energy slowly over time, supporting endurance, stability, and daily work. In a world where people worked physically, building, farming, traveling, that kind of energy wasn't just helpful, it was necessary. And that's why bread became more than food. It became a symbol not just of life, but of sustenance, because without it, survival became difficult. Now here's where it gets interesting. Bread also supported gut health. When made traditionally, especially through fermentation, it became easier to digest, better for the microbiome, more nutrient available, which means biblical bread wasn't just filling, it was functional. It supported the body on multiple levels. And today, when people say bread is unhealthy, they're usually talking about modern, processed versions, not the original form. Because when you return to whole, minimally processed grains, you're much closer to what people actually ate in biblical times, and what sustained them for generations. So bread isn't the problem, the process is. And when done right, it remains one of the most powerful everyday biblical foods for energy and strength. Lentils are one of the most practical biblical foods for daily nutrition. Simple, affordable, and incredibly powerful. They appear in one of the most well-known biblical moments, Esau trading his birthright for a bowl of lentil stew. That alone tells you something. This wasn't just food. It was satisfying, filling, nutritionally dense, because lentils are one of the best sources of plant-based protein in the ancient world. And protein is essential. It supports muscle, repairs tissue, stabilizes energy levels, keeps you full longer. In a time where meat wasn't always available, lentils filled that gap. They provided a reliable, consistent source of strength. But that's not all. Lentils are also rich in fiber, which supports digestion, regulates blood sugar, and promotes long-lasting energy. So instead of spikes and crashes, you get stability, which is exactly what ancient people needed for daily work and survival. They also contain iron, magnesium, and B vitamins, key nutrients that support oxygen flow, brain function, and overall vitality. So when lentils were part of the diet, they weren't just filling the stomach, they were fueling the body. And here's something important. Lentils are easy to store. They last long periods without spoiling, which made them essential during travel, drought, or uncertainty. That turns them into more than food. It makes them security, reliability, consistency. And that's why lentils became a staple in ancient biblical diets, because they solved multiple problems at once: nutrition, storage, affordability, sustainability. Even today, lentils are considered one of the healthiest foods you can eat, especially if you're looking for a natural, plant-based source of protein that supports long-term health. Which means this isn't new advice, it's ancient knowledge, still working exactly the same way today. Pomegranates are one of the most visually striking foods mentioned in the Bible. They appear in temple designs, priestly garments, sacred decoration. But beneath that symbolism, there's a very real reason they mattered. Because pomegranates are one of the most powerful antioxidant-rich foods in the natural world. They're packed with compounds that protect the body at a cellular level. They help reduce inflammation, support heart health, improve blood flow, and protect against long-term damage caused by stress and aging. In modern nutrition, pomegranates are considered a superfood for longevity, but ancient people didn't need lab studies to figure that out. They saw the effects: improved vitality, better recovery, stronger overall health. So the fruit became valuable, not just for eating, but for what it represented: life, health, abundance. And there's another layer. Pomegranates contain hundreds of seeds, which made them a natural symbol of fertility and growth. But again, that symbolism comes from function. Because a fruit that supports the body so effectively naturally becomes associated with life. And here's something else. Pomegranate juice supports circulation, which means better oxygen delivery throughout the body, better energy, better recovery, and even improved cognitive function. So when this fruit appears in biblical texts, it's not random. It's consistent with the pattern we've been seeing. Function first, meaning second. Because ancient cultures didn't assign importance without reason. They observed, they experienced, and then they preserved. So pomegranates weren't just decorative or symbolic elements. They were part of a natural health system, rooted in real biological benefits. And today, science confirms what ancient people already understood. This is one of the most powerful foods you can include in your daily routine. Not because it's trendy, but because it works. Dates were one of the most reliable biblical foods for energy and survival. In desert regions where food was scarce and conditions were harsh, dates were essential. They grow in extreme climates, they store well, and they provide immediate, sustained energy, which made them one of the most important natural energy foods in the Bible, because dates are high in natural sugars. But unlike processed sugar, they come with fiber. That means slower absorption, more stable energy, no sudden crashes. And in ancient times, that mattered, because people didn't eat for convenience. They ate for function, to walk long distances, to work physically, to survive. Dates provided that fuel, quick energy when needed, and lasting support over time. But there's more. Dates are also rich in potassium, magnesium, and antioxidants, nutrients that support muscle function, hydration, and heart health. Which means they didn't just provide calories, they supported performance. And here's another key detail. Dates were easy to carry, lightweight, durable. They didn't spoil quickly, which made them one of the earliest forms of portable superfood. Perfect for travel, for trade, for long journeys across difficult terrain. So when dates appear in biblical contexts, often associated with abundance and prosperity, that symbolism is grounded in reality, because having access to dates meant having access to reliable energy, and reliable energy meant survival, which means, once again, the pattern holds. These foods weren't chosen for symbolism alone. They were chosen because they worked, because they solved real problems. And today, dates are still one of the best natural ways to boost energy without relying on processed foods. Simple, effective, proven over thousands of years. Garlic is one of the most powerful natural healing foods connected to biblical diets. Even though it's mentioned more clearly in historical contexts surrounding biblical times, its role in ancient nutrition is undeniable. Because garlic wasn't just food. It was protection, used daily for its ability to fight illness, strengthen the body, and support overall health. And today, we understand exactly why. Garlic contains compounds like allicin, a natural antibacterial and antiviral agent, which means it helps the body fight infections, supports the immune system, and reduces the risk of disease. In the ancient world, where illness could spread quickly and treatments were limited, that kind of protection was essential, not optional. And people noticed. Communities that consumed garlic regularly were healthier, more resistant, more resilient. So it became part of the routine, not just for flavor, but for function. And there's more. Garlic also supports heart health. It helps regulate blood pressure, improves circulation in the body, which makes it one of the most complete natural remedies for long-term health. And here's something important. Garlic was often consumed raw or minimally processed, which preserved its active compounds, making it more effective, more potent, more beneficial. So when we look at garlic through a modern lens, it's easy to see it as just an ingredient, something added for taste. But in the ancient world, it was much more than that. It was daily defense, a natural shield against illness, part of a broader system where food wasn't separate from medicine. It was medicine. And today, as people look for ways to support immunity naturally, garlic remains one of the simplest, most effective tools available. Not because it's new, but because it never stopped working. Fish is one of the most important biblical foods for strength and mental clarity. It appears throughout biblical accounts, not just as food, but as a reliable source of nourishment. Easy to catch, widely available, and highly nutritious. In regions near water, fish became a staple because it provided something essential: high-quality protein. Protein that supports muscle repair, strength, and overall body function. But fish offers more than just protein. It's rich in omega-3 fatty acids, which are critical for brain health. They support memory, focus, cognitive function, and even emotional balance. Today we understand this through science, but ancient people observed it through experience. Those who consumed fish regularly had better stamina, better clarity, better overall health, which is why fish became a consistent part of ancient biblical diets. And there's another advantage. Fish is easier to digest than many other protein sources, which means the body can absorb nutrients more efficiently. Less strain, more benefit. And in a time without refrigeration, fish could also be preserved, dried, salted, stored for later use, which made it both practical and sustainable. So when fish appears in biblical stories, it's not just incidental. It reflects a real dietary pattern, one built around accessibility, efficiency, and health. And today, fish is still considered one of the best natural foods for brain and body performance, especially when consumed regularly. Because once again, the pattern holds. What ancient people relied on daily, modern science continues to confirm. And fish remains one of the simplest ways to support both physical strength and mental clarity at the same time. Milk is one of the most iconic biblical foods associated with strength and nourishment. You see it in one of the most famous phrases, "a land flowing with milk and honey." And while that sounds symbolic, it's also deeply practical, because milk is one of the most complete natural foods available. It contains protein, healthy fats, calcium, vitamins essential for growth and recovery. In ancient times, this made it incredibly valuable, especially for children, for development, for rebuilding the body after physical labor. But it wasn't limited to just drinking milk. It was also transformed into cheese, into fermented products, forms that lasted longer, digested easier, and provided consistent nutrition even when fresh food wasn't available, which made milk part of a broader biblical nutrition system for daily health, a system focused on sustainability, efficiency, and long-term strength. And there's another layer. Milk supports recovery. After effort, after stress, after illness, it helps rebuild tissue, restore balance, and maintain energy levels, which is why it became associated with abundance. Because having access to milk meant stability. It meant resources. It meant the ability to sustain life consistently. And today, while diets have changed, the core benefits remain. Milk and its natural forms continue to support strength, bone health, and recovery, especially when consumed in its least processed state. So once again, what appears symbolic is grounded in function. Because in the ancient world, food wasn't separated into categories. It was integrated. Nutrition, healing, survival, all in one. And milk was a key part of that system. These weren't just foods mentioned in the Bible. They were a system, a daily blueprint for health, built on observation, refined over generations, and proven through survival. Olive oil for the heart, honey for energy and immunity, figs for digestion, bread for sustained strength, lentils for protein, pomegranates for cellular protection, dates for energy, garlic for defense, fish for brain and body, milk for growth and recovery. Each one solves a different problem. Together, they form a complete approach to health. And what's interesting is this. Modern science keeps confirming what ancient people already knew, not through belief, but through function. Because these foods don't work symbolically. They work biologically. They support real systems in the body, daily, consistently, and without complexity. No supplements, no artificial formulas, just natural foods used correctly. Which raises a simple question. Have we made health more complicated than it needs to be? Because thousands of years ago, people didn't have access to modern medicine, but they had knowledge. Knowledge of what worked, what sustained them, what kept them alive. Then that knowledge is still here, hidden in plain sight, repeated in texts most people read, but don't analyze. So the next time you see these foods mentioned, don't just see symbolism, see function. Because once you understand what these foods actually do, you're not just looking at history. You're looking at a system you can still use today.